You ever been in a situation where you are trying to display hope for somebody in a situation where you're struggling to find hope? Maybe you've had a situation where somebody got a bad health diagnosis at the doctor. And on the outside, you're saying, hey, man, we're going to beat this. You're going to be all right, all this stuff. And on the inside, you're like, man, this is going to be tough. I remember taking my daughters to kindergarten for the first time. I've taken 2 of them to kindergarten so far. And I remember taking them to kindergarten and looking into their, like, misty eyes and just wanting to cry myself, having to leave them there. But on the outside, I'm sitting there like, oh, honey, you're going to love it. It's going to be so much fun. You're going to meet so many new friends. And on the inside, I'm thinking, if anybody hurts you, I'm going to come here and I'm going to gut them. It's not going to happen. I remember there was a game I was coaching. It was I think it was the 5th year I was coaching girls basketball, girls high school basketball. And we were playing our conference, like our bitter conference rival. And you know how rival games go? Most of the time they're going to stay close just because there's so much energy in the building. And that's the way this game was. It was close the whole way, but it got to about a minute left in the game, and our team was down by 4 points. And if you know anything about girls high school basketball, being down 4 points with less than a minute is not a good situation. As a coach, I'm sitting there like, it feels like it's trying to climb Mount Everest in a blizzard. Like, this is not good that we're down 4 right now. But I tried to keep just a kind of good attitude about it, and I kept coaching the girls. I kept barking out what they should be doing and all this stuff. And it got to about 45 seconds left in the game, and I called a timeout. I think I had 1 timeout after this left. And so I call timeout, and I bring the girls into the huddle, and I'm like, okay, we're down 4. We're going to go for a 3 right now. So, and my thinking is, again, this isn't very hopeful thinking probably, but my thinking is, if we make the 3, that's a big if. If we make the 3, we're down 1, and then we'll follow them. If they hit both free throws, we still are only down 3, and we can come back and it's a 1-possession game only. So that's what's going on in my head. And so I call out a play that we would work on this play probably once or twice every week at the end of practice. It was a play called Alice. And the play is designed for me to get my best shooter wide open at the top of the key for a 3-point shot. And here's the deal. In practice, about half the time the girl would actually get open. And then about 1% of the time, she would actually make the shot that she was open for. So in my head, I'm not thinking like, oh man, this is going to go in, I know it. But I have to make sure I tell the girls that I believe that they can do it. So we're in the huddle, I'm like, girls, you got this. I'm telling you, look at my eyes. You got this. And I'm like, I hope my eyes are not betraying my real feelings. And so here's the deal. They come out, and they run the play to perfection. Girl hits a shot. We're down 1. It's great coaching. All coaching, right? No. So at this point, I yell at the girls. I'm like, okay, we got to foul. And so we follow the girl. We follow the girl with the best free throw percentage in the entire conference that year. So there's about 30 seconds left. This girl's going to line to shoot 2, and we're up 1. She's got ice in her veins. She drains them both. And so now we're down 3 with about 30 seconds, and we're bringing the ball up the court. I don't want to call a timeout because I've only got 1 timeout left. And so I'm like, hey, let's call out Alice again. Maybe they're dumb and they won't guard it, even though we just did it. Well, they guarded it. And so we're just throwing the ball around the court for like 20 seconds, got no shot. Finally, about 12 seconds left, I call timeout. Bring them into the huddle. And, you know, I'm trying to do everything I can to pull this thing out. And so I pull out a play that we worked on maybe once a week. It's a sideline out-of-bounds call called special. Now, the reason it's called special is it's that one play that you only dig out at that one moment where you have to get a bucket and you don't know how else you're going to do it. It's essentially the hopeless play. But I don't tell the girls that. We call out special, and I draw it up, and I say, girls, you got this. Look at my eyes. They go out. They didn't have it. We got a shot. We got a really bad shot, and we airballed it. Hit nothing. And so with 2 seconds left in the game, my shortest player on the court, she grabs a rebound. She grabs this air ball underneath the basket, And she's like, well, I gotta shoot. There's only 2 seconds left. Problem is, we're down by 3. And if she shoots that shot and makes it, I got no timeouts left. That's the end of the ballgame. We lose by 1. Time runs out. But they foul her. Yes, we got a chance. So she's going to the line to shoot 2 free throws, and we're down 3. And so I pull her aside real quick. I'm like, hey, you've got to make the first one. That's easy. Got to make the first one, and then you miss the second one on purpose, and we're going to get the rebound, we're going to put it in, and we're going to tie the game, we're going to go overtime, and we're going to win it. Yeah, right. There's no way that's happening, right? So she does her part. She hits the first free throw, which is a miracle in and of itself in girls basketball sometimes. The free throw percentage for us was under 50% that year, I think. So I get the other girls in place, and I'm like, you got to get the ball. Just get the rebound. And so I've actually got the play. This is what happened. Take a quick look. Yeah, are you as excited as me? Now wait, we're gonna play it one more time. I want you just to watch me this time. If you don't think I'm an excited person in life, I'm the one coach and stand up right there. Just watch it. Yes. Now, I'm going to go and I'm going to give her a high 10. I'm just pumped. Like, yeah, we're going to go win this thing. I get jacked every time I watch it. I just watched it this morning already. I'm jacked. I'm ready to go. So now we get to overtime. Problem is about a minute or 2 into overtime, my all-conference point guard, she fouls out. And now I'm sitting here thinking, man, how in the world are we going to win this game? I don't trust one person to bring the ball up the court and not throw it to the other team. So I pull aside my second best ball handler on the team, and I look at her and I go, look in my eyes. You got this. I believe in you. I didn't believe in her one bit. Okay? Didn't believe in her one bit, but I was telling her, I believe in you. And crazy thing is, we found a way to win the basketball game. And it was probably out of all of I coached for 8 years, it's probably the most exciting finish to a game. When I see some of those girls, we talk about that game, because it was just one of those games. The only reason they were able to come out and win that game at the end is because they held on to that little tiny sliver of hope that they had. And it was a tiny sliver of hope. Hope is something that every single one of us need. But hope is something that is difficult to come by at times. In fact, we find it weird when somebody has like this crazy amount of hope. If you're not a morning person, you know a little bit about that, because you can think of that one person who comes up to you and they got a smile on their face and they're like, good morning. And you're like, shut up, boom, punch them in the face. Like we don't want hope sometimes. There was a girl in my youth group, and she came from a pretty rough home situation. Her folks were kind of abusive to one another. She was actually on the verge of becoming an alcoholic in middle school, until God grabbed a hold of her life and did awesome stuff with her. And she was so excited to tell people about Jesus. She felt like if she had 2 minutes to tell somebody about Jesus, that they were gonna buy in and believe in the hope. And I hate to admit it, but there were times where I was kind of like thinking to myself, girl, you gotta just chill out a little bit. Because big time hope can scare us in a big time way. You see, we grew up assuming that things that are good are just simply too good to be true. We see it too often. It's too good to be true. It's hard, if not impossible, to have hope in something that you simply cannot see or visualize in actuality. That's why it's so important as a coach to get kids to believe, like, you can do this. They can't see it in their head. They've never come back from a situation like that. You've got to give them that little bit of hope so that they can see it. That's why I also think it's hard for us. We often sell short the hope that we have in Jesus. We sell short that hope that we have in Jesus. It's difficult for me in my everyday life to believe that Jesus is the answer to every issue that comes into my life. It's difficult for me to believe that another person in my life can be so transformed by Jesus, because sometimes I just don't feel like I see it. So we sell short the hope that Jesus has to offer us because we see him in the context of the way that we see the world around us. It is hard for us to conceive of someone who has absolutely zero fault in him whatsoever. It's hard for us to conceive of the perfect person, Jesus, because we never see perfection in this life. And so I always come back to this verse. This is one of my favorite verses in Scripture, and it's one of those verses that it helps me to be excited about the future. It gives me hope that one day all the hope that I'm putting in Christ is actually going to come to fruition. And it comes from 1 John 3, verses 2 and 3. And John says, "Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. All who have this hope in him purify themselves, just as he is pure." Here's the thing, you and I, we've never seen anything that's completely perfect. That's just the way it is. But we are drawn to things that are close to perfection. A lot of you probably know that I grew up in the North Woods of Wisconsin. And a lot of you travel up to the North Woods because of the thing I'm about to talk about. It's the beauty. I loved it. The last couple years that I was living there, I would go out for nighttime runs because there's this lake in Minocqua, downtown Minocqua, that is just gorgeous. And when you run by this lake in the dead of night, it's something to behold. It's so beautiful. And you look up at the stars, and you know it's the North Woods, and so even with this town lights, you can still see 10,000 more stars than you can see here. And there's something about that thing that's so close to perfection. It helps me at times to tangibly feel like I can feel the presence of God in a way that I can't in other ways. But here's the thing, even these things that seem perfect, we go out into God's creation and we feel this perfection. Even God's creation, though, has been tainted by this sinful world. You know, there's usually lights anywhere, and so even if I see the stars, there's like this cloudy vision of them. I can't see them perfectly. Or looking at that lake, that would normally be this glass-covered lake, it's got a boat on it in the middle of the night. Like, I want to see that. And, I mean, we've got animals in the world that it's so beautiful, but they would kill us if we went close to it. Or storms come in these natural areas that are so beautiful, and they wreak havoc, and they cause danger. But when we see something that does approach perfection, we are drawn to it. I think of the laugh of a little child. Such a great sound. You're going to think I'm crazy about this, but the sound of a basketball swishing through a net, oh my goodness, people. Perfection. So good. How about a gentle embrace from somebody? Unless you're heartless like Eric, who doesn't like hugs, that is a pretty close to perfect thing. A sunset or a sunrise off in the distance. Those things are close to perfection. You see, when you and I see Jesus, when that day comes where we see him face to face, we will finally know and finally understand fully the perfection that he beholds and the reason for the hope it is that we've placed in him. But not until then are we going to fully get it. If we look at this verse again, it says, "Now we are the children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known." You see, we can't fully fathom what God is going to make out of us. We can't fully fathom just how good it is to be considered a child of God. But then we read this in the next part of the verse. It says, "But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." Right now, if you're a follower of Christ, you've put your hope in Christ. But we still only see in part the perfection and the goodness, the 100% goodness that is Jesus. We can't fully comprehend it. This side of eternity, it's like there's this cloud over our vision of who Jesus is. We can't see it completely perfectly. In fact, I think that it was the same way when Jesus was walking on the earth. There was a cloudy vision that people just couldn't fully comprehend who Jesus was. So there's this guy in the Bible named Lazarus. He's a friend of Jesus. Jesus, stinking rose the guy from death. Lazarus died, and Jesus comes and brings him back to life. But we see this cloudy vision that the people saw of who Jesus was. Not all those people were like, "Man, Jesus, he's supernatural. He's amazing. We got to follow this guy." They're like, "It was probably a trick." There's this cloudy vision. In youth group this last week, we were talking about a guy named Malchus. If you remember the story of Malchus, he was a servant of the high priest. And he was with the group that came and arrested Jesus the night that he was betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. Well, what happens, it's one of the weirdest stories in the Bible. I think it's so cool. But the disciple Peter gets ticked off at Malchus for coming to arrest Jesus, and he takes out his sword and cuts off his ear. And Jesus bends down, he picks up the dude's ear, and he just puts it back on his head. Like, that's crazy. That's supernatural stuff. Here's the thing, though. I think Malchus still had a cloudy vision of who the real Jesus was even in that moment. Because we don't see in the rest of the gospel, we don't see this guy Malchus going over and like, hey, guys, why are we arresting this Jesus? Like, dude, just heal my ear. Guys, what are we doing? But he's got a cloudy vision. He can't see who this Jesus really is. Only when we see the risen Jesus does the Bible say that we're actually going to fully comprehend what his goodness is. And only then does the Bible say that we're going to actually become like him. But guess what? That day is actually coming where we're going to see him like that. The question is, how well will you choose to get to know the hope of Jesus before that day comes? The only way that our hope will ever grow in Jesus is if we come to know his perfect nature more closely and accurately to what it really is. But the bottom line is that we are convinced by this world that we see around us that's awful half the time. We're convinced this world pretty much stinks. And a lot of people, because the world stinks, they get a cloudy vision as to who God is. Well, if the world stinks like this, then God can't be that great. But in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5, Paul writes, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. See, Paul's not dumb. He knows the world stinks. He knows it's this life that we live, it can be tough. But that doesn't negate who Jesus is. It doesn't negate the supernatural goodness, the supernatural love that Jesus has to offer each and every one of us. And so you and I have to do what Paul says in this verse. We have to demolish arguments that go against our knowledge of who God is. We have to demolish the arguments that cut into the hope that we know that Jesus really has for us. It's the only way we're going to hold on to hope. We have to take every thought captive. See, my girls actually struggle with this. I got 4 daughters. My 2 youngest daughters, they're 5 and 3. And there are times at which they struggle with this kind of thing. What happens is, my wife and me, we'll play with them all day, and we're having fun with them, and they're laughing all the time, and life is all good. And then we don't let them do one thing. Maybe it's we don't let them play with a phone, or watch a TV show that they want to watch, or eat Skittles for dinner. I don't know what it is. But something happens, and all of a sudden, one of my daughters, Sadie's really good at this. You don't even like me. Yeah, you're right. I spent all day with you because I don't like you. Stop it. What gets inside a kid's head that all this good stuff can be going on, but they still get it in their brain that, man, my parents don't like me because I didn't get to do this one thing. Here's the thing. Here's where our hope needs to lie. When it comes to our understanding of God, this is where our hope lies. Jesus loves us so much that even in the moment where we were in our greatest opposition to him, he chose to come and die for us. We read that in Romans 5:8. We read in John 3:16 that what he cares about is simply that we believe in him and what he did on the cross for us. In fact, Romans 8:39 alludes to the fact that there's nothing that you can do that can take God's love away from you. Now, your behavior may go AWOL at times. You may do things that God is like, that you're thinking, man, God would just be so mad at me for doing this. Here's the thing. God may not be pleased with everything that you've done. But that doesn't mean that God isn't pleased with you as a person. See, those mistakes that we make, they were taken care of on the cross. That is the hope that we're talking about this morning. It's so easy to forget what that hope looks like. It's easy that when things go wrong in my life, or when I do things that are just big time wrong, it's easy for me to say that, man, Jesus turned his back on me. But I'm telling you, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I think for us to think that about God, it's just about as dumb as when my kids think that I don't love them because I didn't let them look at the phone. I literally, when one of my daughters says something like that to me, I can't help, I laugh at them because it's comical. Like, you honestly are going to sit here and try to say to me that my wife, Crystal, the nicest person I've ever known, doesn't like you right now? You're not smart, kid. And sometimes I think Jesus is sitting there with the same kind of, he's got to laugh at us, thinking like, you really think because you did that I don't like you right now? See, in our dark moments, it's not our faith that fails us. It's our knowledge of Jesus' true nature that fails us. It's our knowledge of Jesus' unrelenting love that fails us. And then what happens from that is our faith wanes. John 16:33, Jesus says this, I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world. This is one of my favorite verses because if we can come to accept what Jesus says in this verse, and we can know it, we can know what this verse says, then we can actually have hope that lasts. We can have a hope that perseveres. We can have peace that perseveres. But what's really crazy is Jesus does something weird here. He says, you guys can have peace that lasts. But this world stinks. You're going to have a lot of trials and sorrows. And I'm sitting there, you first read that and you're like, man, Jesus, thanks. That really helps me a lot. But I think of this as kind of one of those things that, let's say you're a student and you're about to go to school to be a doctor or a lawyer. And everybody's like, man, you're going to make so much money. And then you realize you got to take out $500,000 in student loans to be able to get to that place. It's like this good news wrapped in some bad news. Jesus is telling us that we can have peace, but he gives us this bad news that it's going to be hard. Life is going to be hard. But then he layers that awful news with something better. He says, I have overcome the world, so don't worry about it. You see, unless you really know Jesus, you don't really understand what a big statement it is that he's saying right here. He's saying that every bad thing that you can comprehend, he's overcome it. Temptation, he's overcome it. You struggle with the temptation. Come alongside Jesus and he can help you through. Death, you worry about it. You're fearful of it. Jesus has overcome death. You come alongside Jesus and he can help you overcome death. That doesn't mean you might not physically die. That's part of the bad news part of the whole thing. But with Jesus, there's always a brighter side. There is a hopeful side. With Jesus, even physical death can't win because spiritual life then actually takes over. I got a good friend that he just finished writing a book, and it actually came out this last week. It's a book called Suffer Well. And he writes something in there. I was reading it this week. He wrote something in there that it stuck out to me. I think it's so good. My friend Dan writes, when you follow Jesus, peace is not the absence of opposition. It's the presence of someone greater. See, people, that's the hope that I'm talking about right now. It's not that life is going to be easy. It's going to be cherries, cake with cherries on top or whatever. But in the midst of all that you go through, Jesus is right there assuring you something greater on the other end of it. See, Jesus has overcome everything. It is hard for us to believe in the one who has victory all the time because we always experience loss. If you're a sports fan, let's say you're a Packer fan. Sorry. You got 30 or 32 teams in the NFL. It's rare that your team finishes out on top. It's rare that your team wins the last game of the year. Unless you don't go to the playoffs, you have a better chance sometimes because you can win that last game. We experience loss more than we experience victory. And so it's hard for us to comprehend this Jesus who has the victory for us all the time. But here's the thing, guys. Your hope is not determined in your circumstances. Your hope is not determined on your ability to live a moral life. Your hope isn't even determined on anything that has to do with you. Your hope in this life is determined completely 100% on the goodness of who Jesus is. That's all it is. In Jesus, I don't have to just hope that I'll be okay if I live a certain way. In Jesus, I don't just have to hope that he's going to take care of all my little worries, but I gotta worry about the big stuff. See, in Jesus, our hope is all-encompassing. I have hope that goes beyond the scope for what I would actually dare to hope for. You see, I dare to hope for little things. I dare to hope for financial well-being. Jesus wants to give me something greater. He says, Kellen, I want to give you spiritual well-being. I dare to hope for physical health. And again, God says, I want to give you something more. I want to give you life everlasting. That the moment that your physical health fails, you still got something greater, which is spiritual life. I dare to hope in having loving relationships around me. And God, again, he goes above and beyond that. And he dares to give me something greater, which is even when all of your relationships go by the wayside, I give you an assurance and a security in the relationship that you can have with your Creator. And I think that this kind of hope is meant to lead us somewhere. The initial thought, I think, for a lot of us is, where does that, when I realize this hope that I have in life, where does it lead me? A lot of times, the initial thought is, it leads me to, I need to please God with the way that I live my life. But again, I think that this is a misunderstanding of who Jesus is. See, the truth is as followers of Christ, we are already pleasing to God. We're already pleasing to Jesus. You look back at creation and what God says in the book of Genesis after he created man and woman. He looked back at that day and he said, it is good. He calls us good. See, I think our hope, the hope that we have in Christ, it's meant to lead us to something more than just good behavior. Our hope is meant to lead us to where we are giving hope to the rest of the world. That's what Jesus came to do. Jesus came to give us hope. A perfect example of this is a story about a short guy named Zacchaeus. I like Zacchaeus because he's short. I hang out with short people. That's why I like Bernice. It's not the only reason. She's really cool. But Zacchaeus is this short dude who is a tax cheater. And he's a tax collector. And because of that, he's a cheater. Everybody hates him. And because they hate him, they continue to pour into him this idea that, well, I'm no good, so I'm just going to continue to cheat. But then Jesus comes to his town one day. And the Bible talks about how because Zacchaeus was too small, he couldn't see over the crowd, so he climbs up into a tree. And Jesus calls him out of the tree, says, Zacchaeus, come on down, for I'm going to your house today. Everybody know the song? Yeah, you just had to go through your head, didn't you? I'm sorry. Sorry to do that to you guys. So Jesus goes to his house, and he shows him real love, true love. And he shows him that he's actually worth something. And from that moment forward, Zacchaeus' life changed. And so why is it? Why does Jesus do what he does? We see at the end of the story in Luke 19:10, Jesus says, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. How did Jesus seek the lost? He gave the lost hope. How did he give the lost hope? He gave the lost hope through love. That's what he did. People like Zacchaeus, people like the Samaritan woman who was divorced 5 times and no Jew would ever want to come close to her. People like the woman who was caught in adultery who they were going to try to stone to death. All these people's lives were changed because of the hope that Jesus gave them, and that hope was given to them through love, through a perfect vision of what love looks like. That's how Jesus saved the lost. This is why our love needs to look more and more every day like the love that Jesus has to give. If you and I don't represent Jesus well through the way that we love people, there is a whole world out there who is never going to come to know how good the love of God actually is. They're going to continue to see God through this vision that is not clear, it's cloudy. I need to love well in order that other people can have this hope be seen, that they can visualize it. Real hope only comes about when we tangibly see why we should have hope. What's the difference between a church and a book club? What's the difference between a church and the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts, or a church and a team that plays basketball in the league down at the Y? See, all these groups, they've got something in common. They're trying to build relationships, but only one of them has a supernatural thing to it. The difference is that the church deals in the supernatural. Because this church is supernatural, its aim is so much higher than any other group that would come together in this world. We're not just aiming at building relationships. We're not just aiming to meet our felt needs. We're aiming at something beyond ourselves. If the church is going to be supernatural, if the church is going to show supernatural kind of love, it's got to be the kind of love that Jesus has shown us. If the church isn't supernatural, it's going to be superficial. And so it is time that we, in our own lives, we stop selling short this hope that we have in Christ. See, our greatest responsibility as Christians is to represent Jesus well with our lives. Here's the thing. The reason that we're supposed to represent Jesus well is not so that Jesus will be pleased with us and be happy with us. See, Jesus did all that work on the cross so that he could look at us and love us and see us as forgiven and we're cleansed, all that stuff. The real reason our behavior matters is so that we can show the world a more perfect version and a more perfect vision of who God is. That is what we're called to do. That is why our actions are so important. And it's a huge responsibility. If people are going to find hope in Jesus, they have to encounter a Jesus that's worth hoping in. If they're going to encounter Jesus, they have to encounter a Jesus who's supernatural. And if that's going to happen, they have to encounter a love in us that is supernatural like Jesus' love. See, the real Jesus, if we could come to know that real Jesus, he is perfect and he is worth our hope. Eventually, the Bible says that every single knee is going to bow, every tongue is going to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And the reason that that's going to happen is there is going to become a day where Jesus is going to take down that cloud that's in front of him, and he's going to show everybody exactly who he is. Until that day, you and I hold a responsibility to reflect Jesus enough, to reflect his love enough, that it would be so powerful that people would see it as being hopeful enough to give their life to. Your behavior isn't the thing that's necessarily going to get you into heaven or get you out of heaven. Jesus did the work for that on the cross. But your behavior may be the thing that would help someone else to see Jesus accurately enough, or on the other end, inaccurately enough, to make a difference in their eternal destination. And I know that's a big thing to say, and some people will be like, that doesn't sound right. Here's the deal. We have a responsibility to help people see the real hope of Jesus in our lives. Jesus calls on the church to be the beacon of hope in this world that's so dark. And I want you to understand something I'm about to say. You are the church. I'm saying that on an individual level. I know that we all are the church. We the people are the church. But I want you to get it on an individual level. You are the church. The reason it's important for us to see that on an individual level is because if we only look collectively as we are the church, what happens is I can then start to think that somebody else is going to do the job to show hope to somebody that I'm supposed to show hope to. As individuals, we are the church, and we're supposed to show that hope to people. Only you have the relationship with your neighbor that you have. Only you have the relationship with your boss or with your employees that you have. You may be the only person put in that unique situation to show somebody more closely what Jesus actually looks like than what they've seen. And so here's my question for you this morning. What are you praying for? Who are you going to God and asking for him to do a supernatural thing in their life, a thing that you can't do yourself? Pastor David is going to actually be saying in his sermons this weekend to the Beloit campus, he's going to challenge people to put in a reminder into their phones at 6 o'clock, either for the morning or the evening, to pray for the 60,000 people in our area that don't know Jesus. He was also talking about whether or not he should tell people how they should put a reminder in their phone, which I think would have been hilarious to listen to. But that's a side note. Maybe we need to put a reminder in our phone for the people that are in our area that don't know Jesus. Or maybe you need to personalize it more. Put a reminder in your phone for that one person, or that two people, or that one family that you know God is calling you to help them see what the hope of Jesus looks like. Who in your life needs to come to know the hope that's born out of the love that Jesus has for you? Who are you loving that hasn't earned your love? If you want to show somebody a more perfect image of the love of Jesus that is perfect, and that the kind of grace that he gives that's unearned, go and love somebody that hasn't earned your love yet. We are called to love people, and it's the only way that we're going to extend the hope of Jesus to somebody else. It's the only way to help someone else get to know this perfect image of Jesus' love. But here's the thing, people don't see perfect love. People don't see it. To grasp onto that kind of love that Jesus has to give them, we need to be that closer version to love like Jesus for them. It's time that you and I think we need to start taking big-time risks to show people this big-time hope that we can have in Jesus. Why don't you pray with me?